Good morning, and we welcome you all to the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment. This hearing is called to order. Almost 1 year ago, on December 22nd, 2008, hundreds of acres of land in Tennessee were buried in toxic sludge after an accidental breach at a disposal pond at a TVA plant. The breach resulted in the release of 1.1 billion gallons of the byproducts of burning coal. It covered more than 300 acres of land in a gray, poisonous muck, damaging homes and property and tainting nearby rivers. This toxic stew contained high levels of arsenic, selenium, mercury, and other dangerous substances. It was quite literally a poisonous lump of coal dumped on a nearby community just 3 days before Christmas last year. Exposure to these pollutants can wreak havoc on human health, including increased risk of cancer, birth defects, reproductive problems, gastrointestinal illnesses, damage to the nervous system and kidneys, and learning disabilities to children. They have also been associated with acute symptoms of hair loss, severe muscle cramps, nausea, joint pain, confusion, and blistering skin. The cleanup for the catastrophic event that occurred in eastern Tennessee is estimated to cost more than $1 billion. It completely destroyed 3 homes, displaced all nearby residents, crumpled docks, and wiped out roads. The Kingston catastrophe caused the media, the public, and the Congress to focus attention on EPA's long-standing failure to promulgate meaningful regulations for the disposal of this material. Despite the litany of damage from coal combustion waste, current regulations have been left largely to the states, resulting in widespread inconsistencies in waste management. In the wake of the TVA disaster, I wrote 2 letters to the EPA addressing the lack of national policy to regulate and monitor coal combustion wastes and its impact on health and the environment. A decade after announcing that national regulations were needed, the EPA finally said in March of this year that it would propose regulations for coal waste disposal by the end of 2009. Every state in the nation currently gets at least some of its electricity from coal-fired plants. Each year, these power plants, along with industrial facilities, produce approximately 130 million tons of coal combustion waste. Every day in almost every state, coal ash is dumped into ponds, dry landfills, and abandoned mines. Accidental breaches are not the only threats associated with the management of coal combustion waste. The slow leakage of the toxins the waste contains, even when dumped into dry but unlined storage sites, has poisoned water supplies, damaged ecosystems, and jeopardized public health. And what oozes into the soil and water are dangerous substances such as arsenic, cadmium, selenium, and mercury. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences has identified 24 potentially hazardous metals in coal ash. As EPA moves forward with its regulations, it must ensure that public health is protected for all disposal practices, not just the type of wet impoundment ponds that led to the Tennessee disaster. The good news is that these materials can be recycled. In fact, industry estimates that 45% of coal ash is currently being beneficially reused. However, not all methods of reuse are equally beneficial when it comes to protecting public health. For example, using coal fly ash to make concrete doesn't allow the dangerous chemicals to leach out and is also likely to reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to other means of producing concrete. But other so-called beneficial uses are less protective of public health, using the material as filler for some road embankments or, as we will hear today, to build golf courses can lead to leakage of the very same poisons into the drinking water. EPA should encourage the beneficial uses that truly do protect public health and derive economic benefit to the industry while restricting those that have the potential to cause economic or physical harm to nearby communities. That is what the subject of today's hearing will be. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Let me now turn and recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this important hearing on drinking water and public health impacts on coal combustion waste disposal. As you have already stated, 50% of our electricity, in fact a little bit more than that, is produced by coal in the United States, and 92% of electricity in my home state of Kentucky is produced by coal. I definitely believe it is important that we continue to be able to use coal in the United States for two main reasons. First of all, it provides cheap electricity, which creates jobs and makes us more competitive in the global marketplace. And second of all, it is our most abundant resource here in the United States, since we have about a 250-year reserve of coal. Now, unfortunately, since the 111th Congress began, many, we believe, have been targeting coal specifically for the purpose of making it more difficult to burn coal in the United States in the long term. I think one of the objectives of cap and trade is certainly to make it more difficult to use coal. The Obama administration recently, in its endangerment finding, to give them an opportunity to regulate CO2 emissions, which they've never done before. We've seen that it's much more difficult to get permitting to burn coal. And then we know that in Copenhagen that coal is a principal target as they discuss climate change issues. Now, I don't think any of us are opposed to examining newer methods that will allow coal to be used in a cleaner way, and we're totally supportive of that. And I know that today we have witnesses in the first panel who've experienced some health problems from, they'll tell us about what it's from. And obviously, we want to do everything that we can do to protect health. But as the chairman has already indicated, there are many beneficial uses in building materials and as structural fill for building sites by using this material. And I would also point out that EPA has looked at this issue repeatedly about whether or not coal ash should be listed as a hazardous material. States already regulate this material, and we're willing to work with the federal government to regulate this material. But if you're going to try to classify it as a hazardous material, then there's going to be a major issue on that. Because when you burn a material at over 3,000 degrees temperature, it's very difficult to see how the residue can be very hazardous. And I might say that EPA looked at this in 1993 and determined not to regulate. They looked at it in 1999, decided not to regulate. They looked at it in 2000, decided not to regulate. And then back in 1980, when Congress first passed the Bevel Amendment, they determined that this was not a hazardous product. So I think that it is very important that we have this hearing, but I think it's also important that we proceed in a balanced way, because if America is going to continue to create jobs, and if America is going to continue to be competitive in the global marketplace, then there is not any way that we can eliminate the use of fossil fuel the way Albert Gore and others are suggesting that we do. So this type of hearing is vitally important because it gives us an opportunity to look at it in a balanced approach. We look forward to the testimony of those witnesses on our first panel, as well as all witnesses today. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing. I'm going to waive my opening statement and look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
The gentleman's time will be preserved. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll waive also.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing on the disposal of coal waste We're going to need coal for a long time to come, so we better figure out how to use it properly and how to dispose of the waste. Unfortunately, some of the waste products have caused major health problems, and I thank the witnesses for coming forth today to discuss this. I know it's difficult to come out here and sit in front of a panel, so you deserve credit for that. I know there's some good ways to do it. As the chairman mentioned, encasing it in concrete is an excellent opportunity for us to use that in a beneficial way, but we do need to be careful about using it in other ways. And I look forward to what the testimony is today to make some decisions and to help the EPA in their regulatory process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the hearing today and appreciate the witnesses on both panels for coming in. And we will hear issues that affected the lives of individuals. I always also like to highlight how what we do here in Washington affect other people's lives, and I always have historically put up this poster of 1,200 miners who lost their jobs last time we enacted clean air regulations. This isn't just one mine in my district. In Ohio lost 35,000 coal mining jobs. So we better tread carefully on how we balance the environmental risk with what we do see. And I agree with my colleague from Kentucky, an all-out attack on coal mining, coal use in this country. And so I'll also be focusing on the impacts to these guys who come from real families, real communities, and where small communities in rural parts of my state were destroyed because of the attack on coal. You can put it down, right? I also would like, Mr. Chairman, to ask unanimous consent for 3 letters to be submitted in the record. I know you'll want to look at those.
Without objection, will be.
The first letter is from 74 members of Congress to Lisa Jackson at the EPA regarding our position against listing coal combustion byproducts as hazardous. In fact, there are at least 15 members of this committee on this letter on both sides of the aisle. This letter is an original letter by our good friend from Pennsylvania, Mr. Tim Holden. The second is from the Illinois EPA. In it, they state, based on our past experience, it is our position that classifying coal combustion waste as a hazardous waste is not warranted and would place unnecessary barriers on its beneficial use and reuse in the future. We feel our approach of regulating coal combustion waste under the non-hazardous solid waste regulations is protective of both human health and the environment and is, in effect, a logical way to safely manage coal combustion waste. And that is from the Illinois EPA. The last letter is from the Office of Public Utilities in the city of Springfield, Illinois, which is partially in my district. In it, they say, listing coal combustion byproducts as hazardous waste would have a dramatic adverse consequences for the city of Springfield, that is our state capital, and that the CWLP, which is the water, light, and the city water, light, and power, City of Springfield, CWLP, due to the increase in costs associated with the managing and disposing of coal combustion byproducts, as well as a lack of availability of coal combustion byproducts for construction purposes. They go on to associate the cost of CCBs were listed as hazardous. They identify 4 locations as facilities that are permitted to receive RCRA hazardous waste. These amounts reflect treatment and transportation costs, and we have in the millions of dollars. What does this mean? We better tread very, very carefully. When this country is in one of the worst economic periods that I can remember, to have another attack on good jobs in this country is unwarranted. So I would caution us to go carefully, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sabe.
I didn't do the UC for everybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to participate briefly here.
I'm sorry. I know. I've just been reminded that the gentleman is not on this subcommittee.
Right.
So let me recognize the remaining members of the subcommittee. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I lived in Massachusetts, I had a coal-burning furnace to try and keep my house warm because it was so expensive. And then I had a wood stove. Do you know when I finished, I used to take the coal ash and put it on my garden? And every year that garden worked just so remarkably well. It worked to the benefit of the garden and me because we had fresh vegetables. And I used to take the ash from the wood, too, and I would put it in the garden. So I would just say to the chairman and to others that I think there is some redeeming value to some of this coal ash. I note, Mr. Chairman, that the EPA Administrator, Jackson, is not here to testify. And it'd be very helpful to have him here to answer some of the questions about this issue. As I understand it, for 3 decades, EPA has resisted subjecting this coal ash to federal hazardous waste management regulations. And more specifically, in 1993 and 2000, the EPA conducted 2 regulatory determinations on the management and use of coal combustion products, which determined that, quote, in conducting these 2 regulatory determinations, EPA did not identify any, let me repeat, any environmental harm associated with the beneficial use of coal combustion products, end quote, and concluded in both determinations that these materials do not warrant regulation as a hazardous waste material. So it's pretty clear that the EPA has a strong message on this, and the EPA is not here. So I think, Mr. Chairman, it'd be helpful for the committee if you explain why the EPA Administrator is not here to help us further explain his remarks on this coal ash. Imposing a hazardous waste designation on this coal ash will do little to prevent the situation that occurred at the TVA's Kingston, Tennessee plant and will only force greater landfilling of it while eliminating the environmental benefits of using coal ash. So I think, Mr. Chairman, in light of my opening statement, we still have some questions to answer. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the impacts of coal combustion waste disposal. While I strongly support measures that protect the safety of our nation's drinking water, I'm concerned about the negative implications that could result from the regulation of coal combustion waste by EPA as a hazardous waste, instead of under RCRA's Subtitle D Non-Hazardous Waste Authority. This issue involves a very critical component to our country's overall energy policy, and an EPA decision to regulate coal combustion waste as hazardous waste could be devastating to our nation's economy. Mr. Chairman, as we discuss this issue of energy policy in general, I also want to take this opportunity to express my serious concerns about recent decisions from the current administration and the direction that this Congress is taking regarding our energy policy. While we await EPA's final ruling on how they plan to regulate coal combustion waste, I also have serious concerns about the EPA's recent announcement regarding their proposed regulation of greenhouse gases. The EPA's regulation of greenhouse gas emissions would result in the largest power grab of any United States agency over our national economy. The threat of heavy-handed EPA regulation or a cap-and-trade energy tax will result in millions of American jobs being shipped overseas to countries like China and India who don't have the current environmental regulations that we have today. In my home state of Louisiana, thousands of jobs will be lost under a cap-and-trade energy tax, and as a matter of fact, there's a company in South Louisiana that's currently basing their decision to locate in either Brazil or Louisiana, in part on what Washington does on emissions regulations. Not to mention the ClimateGate scandal, which has not only proven that there have been efforts to silence those scientists who present evidence to the contrary of what global warming alarmists would have our world believe about climate change, but as we've seen, the science on climate change was actually corrupted in an effort to help make their case. It seems, Mr. Chairman, that this administration and those running Congress will stop at nothing to pursue this liberal agenda that is killing our economy, resulting in thousands of dollars in higher electric bills for American families and small businesses, and shipping millions more American jobs overseas. Thank you, and I yield back.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. All time for opening statements of members has expired. So what we'll do is we'll ask our witnesses to come up to the panel, if they would, and we'll ask Representative Forbes, if he would, to come over to introduce our first witness.
constituent.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'd like to thank you, members of the subcommittee, for giving me the courtesy to join you briefly today to introduce one of the witnesses on your panel. And I'd also like to thank you for holding this very important hearing. This is an important hearing for at least two reasons. First, members of Congress need to hear from Americans whose daily lives have been interrupted because of uncertainty surrounding a basic need like safe drinking water. At some point today, rain or shine, a family from my district will drive to their local church, gather around a spigot, and bottle up as much water as they need to survive the weekend. Over the past 19 months, hundreds of constituents from my district have not been able to drink a single glass of water from their wells without fear of consuming poisonous toxins. They've not been able to bathe their children without pausing to wonder whether they will pass on a deadly disease. And they have not been able to finance the education of their loved ones because their equity lines of credit on their homes have been devastated. Second reason I believe this hearing is important is because the members of this committee must be made aware that irrespective of any new coal ash regulations, the Environmental Protection Agency is already doing a disservice to our constituents by providing contradictory test results to some of the residents and by withholding hazard scores that could highlight dangers threatening the health and welfare of the citizens we are supposed to protect. Yesterday, I sent a follow-up request to the EPA requesting immediate access to a hazard ranking system evaluation and score for the Battlefield Golf Club in Chesapeake. This information would provide families and constituents from my district an understanding of the nature and severity of any toxic contamination on or near their personal property. To date, it has been withheld by the EPA as a part of the deliberative process. Mr. Chairman, if the federal government continues to deliberate for another 18 months, constituents from my district will continue to live with uncertainty about their drinking water, their health, and their homes. If the Congress and this administration are truly committed to transparency and accountability, certainly we can do better. But rather than requiring you to continue to listen to more words from me at this time, I'd like to introduce you to someone who can tell you what it means to live with uncertainty about the safety of her family's drinking water. Mrs. Robin Whitaker Pierce is a longtime resident of my hometown of Chesapeake, and her family owns a home near the Battlefield Golf Course, which was built atop a foundation that includes coal fly ash. Her family's had to live with the uncertainty as to whether her drinking water is safe for many months, and she has a compelling story to share. Ms. Pierce, I want to thank you for taking time to be here today, and I know the committee looks forward to your testimony. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to introduce Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Congressman Forbes. And Ms. Whitaker Pierce, whenever you feel comfortable, please begin. If you can move the microphone in a little bit closer to you, a little bit more, a little bit closer, and if you could turn it on as well.
The green light means I'm on?
You're on.
I'm on. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for your time. In 2001, our local utility company, Dominion Virginia Power, orchestrated an aggressive campaign convincing area residents and local city council that a golf course constructed with coal ash was not only safe but a great benefit for our neighborhood. Residents and local government were assured on numerous occasions and in various forums that the use of such material posed no threat to our community and that any and all safeguards would be adhered to. And, quote, fly ash in this specific use was safe as dirt. We now know differently, thanks to the diligent work of a local newspaper reporter, Robert McCabe. Mr. McCabe reported tests of monitoring wells on a golf course sculpted with 1.5 million tons of fly ash yielded alarmingly high levels of toxins in groundwater. All of the homes in the immediate area rely on private wells as our water source. Immediately, the local city government ordered area wells tested and requested the EPA's help in discerning potential risks to our community. 19 months later, my home has been tested multiple times by 3 different agencies, including the EPA, and results are inconsistent and confusing. Lead levels have been detected in excess of 3 times the EPA's action standard, and on one such occasion, water tests were done on the same day by 3 firms. 2 of the 3 detected high lead levels, yet a call from the EPA's representative said, good news. There's no lead in your water. You can imagine my alarm as a mother when the EPA representative asked about young children in my home and their ages. And later that day, I received a call from a doctor at the Centers for Disease Control urging me to get my children's lead level tested. The EPA continues to test my water every few months, and I get those results. But to the layperson, they are confusing, and I feel as in the dark now as I was when all this started. For example, just Tuesday, 2 days ago, an EPA representative came to my home to conduct another water test. Is that my time? I won't have a filibuster. Relax, relax. It turns out that all of the tests that have been conducted inside my home have been done at the only sink with the only dedicated filter, auxiliary filter, let me put it that way, and is used least in our home. Consequently, all of the data that they have collected to this point is not a true representation of our exposure, as the water we brush our teeth with and bathe with has yet to be evaluated. How did this happen? For 5 years, hundreds of truckloads of coal ash were dumped daily in our community. We've since learned that those same truck drivers were required to have hazmat licenses, were wearing masks and protective clothing, yet our children unknowingly played outside amongst this dangerous dust. Neighbors recall coming home and finding layers of gray, chalky residue on vehicles and pool surfaces. None of my neighbors had any inkling of the dangers we were being exposed to. Dominion did, but we didn't. We now know, experts warn of the dangers of heavy metal toxins leaching from coal ash when exposed to water. Yet, coal ash was spread over a 220-acre site in our backyards in a region with a notoriously high water table. And I think we have some pictures. Ladies and gentlemen, this is someone's yard. And please understand that this is just a small area, but Roy, if you could flip over to the next picture, that's my street. We have recreational boating every time a storm comes through to our neighborhood. Please explain to me how it is that coal ash, no liners, was thrown into my backyard in an area like this. And this is not a one-time occurrence. Our streets and yards are underwater when storms come. But even after Dominion Virginia Power commissioned feasibility studies that discouraged using fly ash as a construction material, they pushed on. Permits for a septic system on the golf course location were denied by the health department due to the high water table. Yet, that 1.5 million tons of fly ash was dumped on the same site, and Dominion pushed on. Just 50 miles from Chesapeake, between 1957 and 1974, fly ash from Dominion's Yorktown Power Generating Station was disposed of in 4 abandoned burrow and gravel pits. This area later was designated by our own EPA as the Chisholm Creek Superfund site. Even in light of this previous debacle, Dominion pushed on in Chesapeake. The reverberation from this lack of regulation has been enormous. Numerous families have recently been diagnosed with cancer, asthma, and autoimmune diseases, not to mention our fear for our children's future health. Are these illnesses related to dust and water exposure? It may take years for the effects of our exposure to this toxic waste dump to manifest themselves. Since May of 2008, my family and other families in our neighborhood have not used their tap water to cook or drink. We have been reduced to traveling to a municipal cistern where 2 to 3 times per week we fill empty gallon jugs with water to bring back home for our use. Most of us still bathe and brush our teeth with the tap water. What other alternative do we have, and who is there to provide for our safety? The financial ramifications are devastating. As a professional realtor, I can assure you that as long as the specter of fly ash looms over our community, our houses will not sell. We are literally held hostage in our homes, not at the barrel of a gun, but by the cesspool of poisons in our backyard. We have retired military veterans who have proudly served our country for 20-plus years. They want to move home, but they can't because no one will buy their house. Elderly couples who have lost a spouse and cannot keep up with their homes want and need to downsize, but they cannot. My husband has been a self-employed electrical contractor for over 25 years. The equity in our home is our retirement. We have been wiped out. There is no equity in a home that no one will buy. How will we put our boys through college? And what am I going to do with my children if my husband passes away? One family in our neighborhood cannot qualify for financial aid for their child's college education because they own their home, but it's worthless. My children are afraid. Their friends' parents are concerned about their children's exposure when visiting my home. An 11-year-old was at our house for a sleepover and asked me, "Miss Robin, I just washed my hands. Do I need to do something about the poison water?" I was just excited that he washed his hands after going to the bathroom, frankly, but the Virginia Health Department has been no help. Virginia's Department of Environmental Quality let this happen again and has been a colossal disappointment. The EPA, they're out to lunch. I have absolutely no faith in an environmental protection agency that continues to come to my house, but until 19 months after coming to my house, just realizes that they're testing the wrong tap, the tap that my children brush their teeth and bathe with. We certainly cannot expect the local power company to operate in a conscientious manner if our government doesn't help. We, the public, are stunned to find that there is no regulation in place to protect us. The current definition of beneficial use, quite frankly, is an oxymoron. As long as coal ash remains unregulated, we, the people, have no protection from the companies who use beneficial use as a cover for corporate malfeasance. In our opinion, the only hope that we have is for the far-reaching hand of our federal government to mandate the EPA to designate coal ash as a hazardous waste, to regulate its use with the strictest of protocols, and order this tumor in my community gone. And ladies and gentlemen, until that's done, the inmates are running the asylum.
We thank you very much for being here. Let me now turn to Representative Sarbanes from Maryland to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to participate this morning in the hearing, and I thank you for the issues that you're going to be looking at. I have the unhappy distinction that this is now the second hearing that's occurred in this Congress. The first was in Natural Resources, Mineral Resources Subcommittee, in which a constituent of mine will be testifying on the effects of coal combustion waste, fly ash, in terms of exposure to that harmful substance. And I congratulate Ms. Queen, who I'm going to introduce now, for her willingness to come forward and testify on what the effects have been on her and her family, because they've been devastating, just as we heard from Ms. Whitaker Pierce. Let me introduce Gail Queen. Before her illness forced her to stop working, she was a supervisor in the Family Support Division of the Department of Social Services in Glen Burnie, Maryland, which is in my district, where she helped young women obtain jobs, earn GEDs, and go back to school. She then moved to her present home in Gambrels, which is part of my district and which is where the witness in the Natural Resources Committee, Norm Harvey, also resides. Ms. Queen moved to Gambrels in 1997. She has 2 adult sons, and her younger son and her 3 daughters were living with her, were exposed to the coal ash contamination until they moved in 2008. The leaching of this fly ash into the drinking water supply is a really critical issue for us to examine. Again, I appreciate your taking the time and the resources of this committee to focus on it. I thank Ms. Queen for being here, and we look forward to her testimony.
Great. We thank the gentleman. And Ms. Queen, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Good morning, and thank you.
If you can move that microphone in a little bit closer, please.
A little closer.
Maybe put the microphone down just a little bit.
Okay.
There it is. Good.
Okay. My name is Gail Queen, and I live at 2401 Queen Mitchell Road in Gambrels, Maryland. My family has lived in this area for over 100 years. I am a 56-year-old and a widow. I am no longer employed. I live in the Gambrels community, while for over 10 years during that time, 4.1 million tons of coal ash was dumped next to my home by a power company. Roy, could you point? Those are the, yeah, that's the pits right there. And my home is right in that area. Thank you, Roy. And the next picture you'll see is the clouds from the fly ash dump. The dust, yeah. I'm here to tell you about what happened in Gambrels, Maryland, and how the contamination of the air and drinking water has affected my health, the health of my family and community. I'm here today to ask you to make sure that Congress pass legislation so that another community doesn't have to suffer like my community. The coal ash was dumped into an unlined 80-foot deep pit on 84 acres. The coal ash went into an aquifer that supplies my community drinking water, and we all breathed the dust in. Once the community was informed of the problem in 2007, we were given no help by the state or federal government. Later, one of the solutions was to hook up some of my neighbors to a fire hydrant for water. The hoses froze in the winter. For other people, bottled water was supplied and is still supplied today. Every 2 weeks, I get bottled water to wash, bathe, to do everything with every 2 weeks. But this did nothing for our past exposure, both in our drinking water and in the air. The problem in Gambrels with coal ash started in the 1990s at another coal ash dump site. When the power company dumped coal ash in another community, the resident of that community complained, and they moved it down to the dumping area that I showed you over there. When it was required to have a continuous 30-inch thick layer of clay at the bottom of the ash pit, the power company decided to dump the coal ash near my home in Gambrels. There was supposed to be no contact between the coal ash and the surface of the groundwater, with a 4-foot separation between the coal ash and the groundwater. No liner or 30-inch layer of clay was required at the Gambrels site. Sadly, the coal ash went directly into standing water and sand and gravel pit, which had excavation as deep as 80 feet. There was no liner or 4-foot barrier either. The truck drivers who dumped the coal ash dumped it without any remorse. My community was never warned of the danger of toxic coal ash, or that it would go into our water or our lungs and cause injuries. Starting in 1999 and through 2007, tests showed that arsen, iron, magnesium, and sulfate were being leached at dangerous levels, and finally these dangerous chemicals got into our private wells. I have a well at my home. I rely on my well water to provide cooking, drinking, and bathing water. In 2007, the power company began providing me bottled water. Before this, I had never heard of coal ash or its dangers and didn't know this toxic was being dumped in my community. If I had known about the danger, I would have protected me and my family and community long ago. But we didn't know of the danger or even the dumping was going on. Thankfully, the power company did finally take responsibility for the situation by helping the community with these problems. But the contamination of the water remains. It should never have happened. Because of the coal ash contamination, I have lost both my financial security and my health. My biggest monetary asset, my home, is worthless. I cannot afford to pay the mortgage after the death of my husband in 2006, and I may have to file for bankruptcy or foreclosure because of it's not worth anything. Because of the coal ash, I have trouble breathing, and I'm not a smoker. My doctor has told me I have the lungs of an 80-year-old woman because of breathing in something, coal ash. I am terrified about my future health. My husband died in 2006 from renal failure, and I worry that my organs will fail. I will get cancer or I will get another disease because of my exposure to this ash. I also worry about my grandchildren. They drank the water, they bathed, they brushed their teeth. Will they get a disease too? No one can tell me for sure, but I do know they never should have been exposed to this stuff. I ask that you pass legislation to protect people like me and my family. If the Environmental Protection Agency had the authority to require liner and force power companies not to dump close to drinking water system, what happened to me and my community would not happen to anyone else. We do not have the power to protect ourselves. These companies and the state agencies are not protecting us. Coal ash contamination ruins the lives of the people in the community and our environment. It cannot be allowed to happen again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Queen, very much. And our final witness is Mr. Raymond George Hunt, Jr. He and his family have lived in Waterflow, New Mexico, as sheep ranchers for generations. Mr. Hunt and his family operate a small business in supply meat to the local Native American tribes in the Four Corners area of New Mexico. Mr. Hunt's home is adjacent to the San Juan Generating Station of Public Service Company of New Mexico and the San Juan coal mine operated by BHP, and he and his family have been directly impacted by the coal combustion waste disposal practices at these facilities. So we welcome you, sir. If you could move that microphone in a little bit closer. Please begin.
Thank you, sir, for letting me attend this. I own and operate a small family business land my grandfather established in the early 1940s where I raised my 4 children. For generations, we drank from the fresh water on our property without any adverse effects. Our animals grazed nearby and drank from the natural springs in the arroyo during the irrigation season. These water sources were healthy and very productive for our business, which provides meat to the neighboring Native American tribes. In 1974, Public Service Company built the San Juan power plant and began using the dry arroyo to discharge their wastewater. They began burying fly ash in the nearby dry stream beds rather than into lined ponds, which then leached into our underground aquifers, contaminating our good water and very high levels of arsenic, selenium, potassium, chromium, lead, sulfate, and many others. By 1975, after the dumping of coal ash began, my family started to get sick. I was diagnosed with heavy metal poisoning with extreme high arsenic, iron, lead, selenium levels. I lost nearly 100 pounds in less than a year. I was so weak I couldn't stand or walk, wasn't expected to live. For several years, my diet consisted of steamed chicken, squash, potatoes. Any variation caused extreme diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. My stomach ached and suffered constant indigestion. My wife was sick most of the time with similar symptoms. We had difficulty comprehending simple conversations. Her body became misshapen. God.
Take your time, Ms. Hunt.
My name is Carla Hunt, and I am his second wife. If it would be all right with you, I will finish his statement. My wife was sick most of the time with similar symptoms. We both had difficulty comprehending simple conversations. Her body became misshapen, causing many medical complications that remain today. Our children lost weight and complained of stomach aches. They had constant indigestion and diarrhea. Their hair was falling out and unhealthy looking. Their teeth and eyesight were compromised to the extent they still wear glasses and require frequent monitoring. The children's teachers reported they had difficulty with simple tasks of concentration and comprehension. One son was enrolled in special education classes throughout his high school years. 2 days before Christmas in 1982, PNM approached us, offering us $2,500 to sign a release as a good neighbor gesture on their part. We asked them instead to cover the cost of hooking into the public water system for our family, and they refused. For 2 years, we bought drinking water and carried it into our home until we could afford the connection fees for the public water system. Once we stopped using the well, we began slowly to improve. My wife, kids, and I had been sick at that time for over 10 years. My animals were not so fortunate. I watched 1,400 head of sheep slowly suffer and die from the lack of safe drinking water. Within 2 years, I lost my entire sheep herd and took outside jobs rather than risk selling contaminated meat to our customers. Although they lined the ponds as required by an EPA enforcement action and fine in 1984, PNM set up an agreement that the fly ash would be returned to the neighboring BHP San Juan coal mine and buried in the unlined pits there. The result is that the fly ash and scrubber sludge continues to contaminate the arroyo and groundwater through unlined sites. My children are grown and married now. 2 sons have served several tours of duty in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Germany. All have some evidence of childhood problems they experienced due to the polluted water. My daughters have had very difficult pregnancies and deliveries, which doctors have said may be the result of the childhood poisoning. I have 3 grandchildren who have been diagnosed autistic, also linked to heavy metal poisoning in their mothers, and another who is ADHD. My brother died of developed multiple sclerosis and spent 20 years in a care unit. My father died of cancer. 4 of my stepbrothers and sisters have died prematurely due to cancer and cancer-related illnesses. All were under the age of 40 and healthy, athletic children throughout their high school years with no apparent contributing illnesses. All of them drank from these same polluted water wells and streams. I rely heavily on others to help me with the management and operation of my business, because although recovered, I still suffer many side effects from the poisoning. In conclusion, this is only the story of my family. I have many neighbors with similar stories. Some have lost young children. Others have parents and children with major health problems. Many have lost their livelihoods, their animals, and the ability to provide for their families because of pollution that has come down the Shumway Arroyo and through our underground water sources from improperly disposed coal ash. They, too, were offered good neighbor settlements from PNM in exchange for their silence and agreement to sign a hold harmless contract. My experience is that the energy industry cannot be entrusted with innocent lives or to regulate themselves for the good of the community in lieu of a profit for their stockholders. I urge you to take every measure available to you to prevent this from happening to anyone, anywhere in our nation ever again. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention about this. Them poor animals would die, and they wouldn't even rot. They would mummify. And for the cost of putting in city water, so we did not have to haul water, was only $175, and they refused to do that. And, you know, my kids, I dropped out in the 8th grade in Kirtland. And my kids, when the state epidemiologist showed up, says, under the circumstances, it's only one family that's not worth investigating. My kid said, from age 5 to 2, we want to be better to our government than what our government was to us. And them kids got 52 years first attendance. So I think we better listen to the kids.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt, very much.
Sure.
And we thank each of our witnesses for your very compelling testimony here today. The Chair will now recognize himself for a round of questions, and any of you can respond to this who would like. On our second panel, right after you, we will hear from some witnesses that the characteristics of coal ash are similar to that of dirt or rocks, and that the material is extremely unlikely to pose a health risk. How would you respond to that statement?
Pardon me?
How would you respond to that statement?
Coal ash is dangerous stuff. And just like say, them animals that I had, with all they created a deal by the name of polioencephalomalacia. And just like the sheep, they would lay down. And they couldn't get up because they had lesions on their brains. And the crows would pick their eyes out. And coal ash is a dangerous substance, and it needs to be controlled rather than the stockholders making a huge profit. They need to take care of it in a proper way.
There are no federal regulations in this area. The states have regulations, or they have responsibility for putting regulations on the books. How would you characterize the regulations that your state has for protection of families against the adverse effects of coal ash?
Well, in our case, the state of New Mexico had full knowledge that our well was polluted. And also the EPA had full knowledge, and the power plant also. And they did absolutely nothing to do anything about it. And I'm sure that there is laws on the books that they're supposed to regulate them, but they never did nothing. And just like say, they just ignored us like we was nobody.
Great. Ms. Whitaker-Pierce?
Yes, I would like to comment on that. I think that the information that we presented today speaks for itself. You've got the Yorktown situation that happened, and the identical same utility company came back out and did it in our backyard. I'm not against beneficial use if it's used beneficially. I don't think that it has to be one or the other. But what there has to be is someone that is going to hold these utility companies responsible for disposing of it in ways that we know, without a question of a doubt, are not harmful to the general public.
So you're saying your state did not do enough?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm here. I'm here, absolutely. No.
They have not. Okay. Ms. Queen, did your state do enough?
I don't know so if they did enough, but they did find them $1 million. It was too late then, but they were fined for $1 million.
Now all of you been provided with water in order to deal with the effect of this issue? Did they provide water to you, Ms. Queen?
Yeah,
you testified that that was the case.
Yeah, I still get water.
And do you receive water?
Sir, we've asked the utility company to give us bottled water to see us through this, and they have, across the board, rejected it. Our source of water is to go up to it looks like an outhouse. I wish I had pictures for you. The local city government did build a structure around it so that we weren't exposed to the elements when we were trying to fill up those gallon jugs 2 to 3 times a week. But the insulation is pouring down around it. I mean, you would be appalled at the conditions. And that's how our families in our neighborhood get their water, is to go to this municipal source and fill up jugs.
All right, let me ask you one more question before my time expires. Dominion has stated in correspondence that the developer of the Battlefield Golf Club project met all relevant Virginia environmental regulations when it used coal ash. Do you believe that that is the case?
No, sir, absolutely not. And my well tests say differently.
What regulations were violated, in your opinion?
Well, it's my understanding that the rate of bonders was not at the rate that should have been with that coal ash. It's also my understanding that liners should have been placed. They were not. The developer, hundreds of truckloads on a daily basis, took out the good dirt, sold that, and then replaced it with the coal ash that Dominion paid them to take. And my common sense tells me that if the United States of America went to some third world country and paid this country to take our toxic waste material off of their hands, but we turned a blind eye because we weren't, quote unquote, personally responsible for making sure that that stuff went down the right way, the public outcry globally would be outraged.
Okay. We thank you. We thank each one of you for. Would you like to add something?
Yes. On that situation we had down there, they were dumping untreated human waste down through there also. And what happened when the state had full knowledge that their well was polluted and the kids was involved, they acted like they was a subsidiary of the big, large power company and the large coal mine. And there's no excuse for that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being a little bit late. We had an important Michigan delegation meeting involving the Great Lakes that required all of our attendance. I appreciate your story. Obviously, everyone here has sympathy for you and the circumstances surrounding that. Ms. Quinn, I had one question as it related to your testimony. You indicated that the waste was put into an unlined landfill. Is there a requirement in the state of Maryland that it be a lined facility? Do you know if they violated? Is there such a standard in Maryland? Do you know? I don't know the answer.
No, I'm not sure, but it's too late now. They have one now.
So there is one now.
Now,
so
but
now there is a requirement that it has to be put into
I don't know
a
if
line.
it was a requirement before, but they didn't have one. But now I'm told that it's a liner.
Yeah, I know in my district in Michigan, we have in our state, we have a number of coal facilities, and it's my understanding, and we're trying to find out for sure, but it's my understanding that the waste that isn't used for particle board and shingles and working with asphalt and highways is does in fact go to a line facility, which would then prevent what happened.
Yeah, they do have one now.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Okay.
Gentleman's time is expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of us obviously feel badly about what's happened to you three individuals. And, you know, the problem is with no national standards, some states do better jobs than other states in regulating this problem. Some states are doing nothing, which is a real problem. And in my state of Pennsylvania, our Department of Environmental Protection has provided oversight on beneficial reuse since 1985 and implemented stringent standards in 1992. And Mr. Chairman, I do have letters from our Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and Public Utility Commission, which I'd like to submit for the record.
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
That basically hope that as EPA makes this rulemaking that they say there is clearly a need for regulation of states with lax requirements or no requirements, but they should look at states that do have stringent requirements and are doing this right and not preempt their laws. Especially if our laws are more stringent than what the federal government may end up implementing. So I hope that we don't preempt those states that already have strict standards in place in this process. Ms. Whitaker-Pierce, I'm curious. You got conflicting results from the testing, right? Did you ever have an independent lab? Did you ever yourself hire somebody? If I'm thinking about what I would do in your situation if I started, one person said there's lead and one person said there isn't lead, I would want my own independent testing. And I was just curious, how many different testers were in your home, and did you have anybody that was testing these your water samples for you?
No, I did not personally commission an agency to test the waters. The city of Chesapeake tested the waters. Mm-hmm. They also hired a third-party expert firm, J.R. Reed and Associates, to do water tests along with the EPA.
And you also said they all tested from just one source in your home, and it was a source that had an auxiliary filter. Why was that selected, and did you ever ask the test? Were you present when the testing was done?
Yes, sir, I was. I'm glad you asked because my 5 minutes didn't give me enough time to elaborate on that. They have tested in 2 locations at my home. They have tested at the wellhead, and then they've gone in and tested at my kitchen tap. And this has been done every single time. When I say inconsistencies, sometimes they'll come and take a first draw, and then they'll purge the system for 5 minutes, and then they'll purge it for 10 minutes and 20 minutes, and they'll do various tests along that timeline. And then they were the ones that said, okay, well, we need to go to your kitchen tap. But that kitchen tap has the auxiliary filter that I had put on when we moved out there.
Did you tell them that there was a filter on that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And when I say that they're conflicting and confusing, the sheet that I get, this report that I get, has all of the different levels that have been detected, but I still don't know what the EPA standard on arsenic is, for example. I mean, it was just by coincidence that I found out that the EPA's level for lead was 0.15%. And that was because the city of Chesapeake on their documentation included that benchmark.
So you're getting data, but you're not getting any experts to sit down as a,
no, sir.
I mean, as a layperson to explain what that data means in real terms to you and your family.
No, and I would welcome that. As a matter of fact, it was offered by one of our city representatives, and they said, you know, the EPA is the expert. So if it's okay with you, what we would like to do, with your permission, is to turn over those results to the EPA, and then the EPA person can sit down with their results and then explain to you what all this means.
I see.
Mr. Hunt, still waiting.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, was there ever any testing done of, you know, your water? I mean, there's no disputing what happened to you and your family. You can see what happened, and then as you started to drink bottled water or other water, you eventually started to recover. Yes. Was there ever any testing done by any enforcement agency to determine what was in your water? And
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. What happened, there was a lady that lived down the street there. Her and her husband both met at BYU. And they're very outstanding citizens. And they had 5 boys, and she was pregnant with a 6th one. And what happened, they would come down and they would have her open up her basement to allow them to go in and pull samples out of their well less than 100 feet from the arroyo. And what happened, she was pregnant with a 6th son. And what happened, she come down with leukemia, and she chose not to have any treatment because of her baby. So after the baby was born, the baby was a year old when she passed away. And what happened, the 4 younger children that she's got, they've done missions for the Mormon church and stuff like that. Very outstanding people. And they got to take hormone spray in the mouth to keep from wetting the bed at night. And there's another little boy, his dad owned a dairy. And his uncle come running across the street one day, and he says, "Joe's drowning, come quick." So I run over to see, and what it was his mother's dad's birthday that day. And they had Joe on the floor, and they were working with him, doing CPR and stuff like that. And you can tell he was dead.
But sir, I understand. I mean,
Yeah.
I saw that, and I saw what's happened to your sheep. I'm saying, did anyone ever test this water and issue a report?
Yes,
What was
they
actually
did
in it?
test it, but they never warned the woman down there died of leukemia. They come to her house and make them open the door to pull samples, and they never warned her about what had happened.
You never got results?
None whatsoever.
Wow. I see my time's more than past. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, 3 people, for being with us this morning and explaining your personal experiences. In listening to your testimony, I think that I understand that each of you have well water. I mean, you don't have city water, you don't have county water, but all of you had well water. Is that correct?
Yes.
I've got city water now, but I had to pay to hook onto it.
Yeah,
but at the time, we had spring water.
Okay, but at the time it was spring water, well water. Yeah. And Mr. Hunt, I noticed that in the article up there it said what killed over 1,000 sheep, and it says rancher, state, and PNM. I'm not sure what PNM is, but it must be
Public Service Company in New Mexico.
Okay. Yeah. And then it says that at odds over the bad water.
Yeah.
So there was no agreement between the state, the PNM, and you as to whether or not this water was bad or what caused the bad water.
Well, what happened when they hit the Albuquerque Journal, it was 13 months that they played around and made them animals drink that bad water.
Yeah.
And what happened, there was an individual come in out of the New Mexico Environmental Department. They got him out of risk management, and they put him in as a deputy secretary under the Johnson administration. Mm-hmm. And then when things started heating up, he became the general counsel. And what happened, the state ordered the sheep to be hauled off and tested after me feeding them for 13 months and watched them die. And when they would die, we'd have to pile them up in piles and burn them. And the man come back and he said poor care killed the animals, but you can notify the New Mexico State animal health people, and in the document it says all animals was in good nutritional condition. And I don't know where he got that information from. I'd really love to know.
Yeah. But as far as the water that the sheep drank, that was well water, spring water?
No, that was out of the arroyo there. And what happened after the article come out in the Albuquerque Journal front page, they sent a surveillance man down there, and the surveillance man said 500 parts per million on sulfate is all allowed for an animal, and it was 8 times above that.
Mm-hmm.
And they never did nothing. They just sat back and laughed at me.
Well, now, all of you, it sounds like, are not really satisfied with the way the state dealt with this, the way the state environmental people dealt with this, the way the utility companies dealt with it, which is understandable. But I would ask, did any of you go to an attorney to explore a class action lawsuit or some sort of lawsuit against any of the utility companies?
I tried to do that, and what happened is kind of like going down trying to beat the hell out of Mike Tyson. One thing you're going to do is get abused and get the hell beat out of you.
Yeah. So you determined that was not in your best interest.
There's no justice whatsoever in this mess.
Yeah. We know the chairman mentioned this briefly, but one of the confusing things for us is we have a lot of it. We know that EPA has looked at this coal ash repeatedly through the years, and we know that 1% or less of the coal ash has trace elements of arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, and selenium in it. And the scientists have said, and there's going to be people testifying to this later, that fly ash or coal ash has no more of these trace elements in it than regular soil and regular rocks do. So, you know, it presents a puzzle for us as to whether or not, I mean, I think there's probably agreement that maybe this should be regulated, that there should be some federal regulation, but to classify this as a hazardous material, from the scientific evidence that I've looked at, I mean, I would have some question about that. But from your personal experience, though, you're 100% certain that your problems were caused by your exposure to coal ash. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And when you burn it down and condense it up, what happened? It becomes very poisonous.
But you did indicate, I heard you say that there was proof that there had been some human waste that had been
that also.
So that
but just like today, they haven't dumped human waste in a long time, but it's still up around 8 times above what's allowed, running right into the San Juan River, right on down towards Mexico.
Now, have they corrected this
absolutely
human waste issue?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Nothing would surprise me about them people.
Okay.
Mr. Whitfield, I'd like to respond to that.
Yes.
You can get experts to testify to anything that you want to hear.
Right.
The utility companies obviously have a dog in the fight. Mm-hmm. You can find experts out there that will say that absolutely coal ash is dangerous, certainly should not be breathed, certainly should not be exposed to water, certainly should not be involved in one's water system. And there is no doubt in my mind that the careless actions and the ineptitude of our EPA and our local government and our state governments to regulate this and make sure that people are acting responsibly is the reason that we're all here today.
Now, Ms. Pierce, did you consider legal action, or did you have the same view as Mr. Hunt about the
Well, we are currently represented, yes, by counsel to try to get the right thing done here.
So you are in litigation now, or at least you have retained an attorney to explore it?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I see my time's about expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. The chairman stepped out for a minute and asked me to step in his seat while he's gone. First of all, again, I want to thank the witnesses for coming forth and testifying. Very compelling words that you've spoken this morning. You know, when coal-fired plants are required to scrub their emissions from mercury and other sulfates and so on, I can't imagine how people would think that the fly ash is perfectly safe. But apparently we have some evidence here this morning. Ms. Whitaker Pierce, I'd like to ask if you think that Mr. McCabe's work that brought light to the dangers there, if he hadn't done that investigative work, do you think you'd still be in the dark about the risk and dangers?
Well, I'm still in the dark, but there's no doubt that he is our knight in shining armor we had this construction going on in our backyard for 7 years and really thought that it was safe. So yes, had he have not brought this to light, we would still be drinking the water, and we owe him a huge debt. Yes.
And so you'd be facing potential health problems, you and your family and your neighbors. So he does deserve a certain amount of thanks for that. A lot of thanks.
Yes, sir, he does. And we're not out of harm's way yet. I mean, we had been drinking that stuff for 5 years.
Right.
And are still using it for various purposes in the home.
Thank you. Ms. Queen, you mentioned that tests showing arsenic, iron, manganese, and sulfates were leaching at dangerous levels, but that these tests were not shared with the community. Is that right? The test showing that these substances were leaking into your water, but you were not notified of the test results?
Not in the beginning, but later on we did. Someone came to the door to say the water, was going to be tested, and these are the things, and we should stop. The health department said we should stop drinking the water, and right away, not right away, they started to bring in bottled water for everybody, except for some over on the other side of the road. They put hoses out, but the hoses froze, so they got bottled water too. And we are still getting bottled. They made it right. They are going to put city water in to everybody that had the well water. We're getting city water hookup, and it hasn't come yet. They started city water hookup and no water bill for as long as you own the home. And I still get bottled water today every 2 weeks. So they made right on. The power company did.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when did you first start noticing the dust and started feeling that was being that was hazardous to you and your family?
When I first moved there, I noticed, but we just cleaned the house, we just cleaned it up. Mm-hmm. I get on the house and on the porch, and we start cleaning it up, and then after it came out in 2007, then we realized, oh, that's not good.
So you were ingesting this, breathing it in for years, basically, without knowing that it was dangerous.
No, I didn't know anything about it.
Mr. Hunt, thank you again for your testimony, and thank you for your children's service to our nation. Would you say that the behavior of P&M and the state agencies was conducted in ignorance, or do you think that they knew the dangers and still prevented action from being taken on your behalf?
To tell you the truth, I feel it was criminal. And there's one thing I will say about the man that asked if we ever tried to take legal action. We tried to take it to court. And I've only got an 8th grade education. And what happened when it was all said and done, our lawyer was sitting up there testifying against us. And we refused to accept the settlement, which was $190,000. And we wrote on the release, we are signing this against our will, under duress and intimidation. And went down and filed it at the county clerk's office in Aztec, New Mexico, to make it public document information. And bless their hearts, they went down and said it was a nuisance litigation. It cost me $73,300 for a tax attorney to keep from losing everything I owned.
Was the local media, the Albuquerque Journal, or anything?
The only thing they're out for mainly sell advertisement, and the reason why we subscribe to the paper is just to read the obituary and the advertisements.
Okay, thank you.
But just like I say, I could have lost everything I own.
Looks like my time has expired, and the first panel has finished. So, again, would you, your testimony has been very, very beneficial. Thank you. It's now time for the second panel to step forward.
I've been waiting 28 years for this day. Thank you.
Thank you. just go ahead and read these? Right. Okay, there's 4 witnesses. Would all of the second panel witnesses please take their seats at the testimony table, please? Lisa Evans. Who else? Mary Fox. Thank you. Okay, now we have the second panel in front of us, and I'd like to introduce the witnesses, and then I'll ask for their testimony. First, we have Lisa Evans, as an attorney with specializing in hazardous waste law. Ms. Evans has been active in hazardous waste litigation and advocacy for over 25 years, and is an expert on coal ash issues. She has been a project attorney for the Earth Justice since the year 2006. Prior to Earth Justice, Ms. Evans worked on toxic coal wastes for the Boston-based nonprofit Clean Air Task Force. Ms. Evans began her career as an assistant regional counsel at the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 1. Ms. Evans, you can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing to examine the threats posed to our health and environment by coal ash, the hazardous substance generated by power plants that burn coal. When mismanaged, this toxic waste damages the health and environment of Americans nationwide by poisoning drinking water, fouling the air, and destroying aquatic ecosystems. Federal action on this issue is imminent. Last March, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson made a commitment to publish a proposed rule governing the disposal of coal ash by year's end. My testimony today recognizes the primary goal of this impending rule, the protection of human health. The committee will hear today has heard today, from witnesses whose health and the health of their families and neighbors have been seriously compromised by exposure to the toxic contaminants in ash. Today's witnesses represented 3 separate instances of coal ash contamination, but they have 3 important things in common. First, dry dumping of coal ash, not wet disposal, caused serious harm. Much of the focus this year has been on the deadly dangers posed by wet ash ponds. Wet disposal has drawn national attention since the cataclysmic failure of the TVA Dam, whose release of over 1 billion gallons of toxic sludge was 100 times the size of the Exxon Valdez spill. But today it is significant to note that dry disposal and reuse of dry ash is the cause of damage. This is not surprising. EPA has identified a significant threat from dry disposal in unlined landfills, estimating that such disposal can result in a risk of cancer 50 times EPA's regulatory goal. Second, at each site, state law was woefully inadequate to protect the health of the affected communities. Today, regulation of coal ash is left totally up to the states. But in New Mexico, Virginia, and Maryland, where the witnesses reside, the states failed to put in place even the most basic safeguards. In none of these states would even household garbage have been allowed to be disposed in the manner that ash was. In these states, and in most of the states in the U.S., improper, unsafe, and ultimately harmful disposal of toxic ash is permitted and sometimes even encouraged. Third, the witnesses and their communities were harmed economically. While the focus today is properly on health, significant damage to communities occurs when cheap disposal is unfettered by federal law. Today you heard how Mr. Hunt, a sheep rancher, lost his herd, how the housing values in Robin Pierce's community have plummeted, and how Gail Queen may tragically lose her home to foreclosure. These economic hardships produce stress that tears at the fabric of our communities. The dumping of ash in all three situations was the cheapest route for industry, but the true costs were borne by these witnesses and their neighbors. As a former EPA attorney, I worked to enforce the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. This experience gave me a deep appreciation of the statute's fundamental goal. In one word, the driving force of RCRA is prevention. Congress passed RCRA in 1976 to put in place regulations to prevent, in the first instance, the mismanagement of waste in order to prevent the migration of toxic chemicals. Further, in 1980, Congress explicitly directed EPA to require safe disposal of coal ash. But for decades, nearly 30 years, EPA has failed to promulgate national regulations, and this omission is huge and dangerous. EPA tells us that in 2008, U.S. electric utilities produced 136 million tons of coal ash. This is enough ash to fill the boxcars of a train from this room to Melbourne, Australia. And this amount is rapidly climbing as we capture more toxics like mercury and other hazardous metals at the power plant stacks. The bright spot today is that the prevention of harm from the dumping of ash is a problem we know how to solve. Isolation of toxic waste from water in engineered landfills is 20th century technology at best. Thus, the essential next step is for EPA to promulgate federally enforceable regulations that guarantee that all U.S. citizens are protected from the harms posed by mismanagement of ash. Only under Subtitle C of RCRA will all states be required to adopt minimum disposal standards that protect the health of all living near coal ash dump sites. In sum, I respectfully ask the subcommittee to end the 30-year impasse and encourage EPA to promulgate federally enforceable regulations that will prevent the harm that these witnesses have suffered from occurring again. About 2 years ago, I held Mr. Hunt's infant granddaughter, and I'd like nothing better than to guarantee to her that what happened to her grandfather will not happen to her family in Waterflow, New Mexico, nor to Mrs. Queen's grandchildren in Gambrills, Maryland, nor to Ms. Pierce's children in Chesapeake, Virginia. This subcommittee may have a hand in making this same guarantee. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment on this critically important issue, and thank you especially for allowing the witnesses in the previous panel to have their voices heard.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. The second witness I'd like to call up is Mary Fox, Dr. Mary Fox. She's an assistant professor of policy and management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She is part of the core faculty of the school's Risk Sciences and Public Policy Institute, and her research focuses on the human health effects of exposure to chemical mixtures. Where's the second page? Dr. Fox received her PhD in Environmental and Occupational Health Policy from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Ms. Fox, please begin your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to address the subcommittee today. There are a few important things to know when addressing the health impacts of coal combustion waste. First, coal combustion waste is a complex mixture of well-documented hazardous substances. The types and severity of health effects of coal combustion waste constituents range from benign and cosmetic changes to organ function changes to cancer. As a nation, we produce a large volume of waste. The uses and types of disposal may allow distribution into the broader environment. Taken together, these considerations present us with a public health protection challenge. Some examples of the health effects associated with specific coal combustion waste constituents include cancer associated with arsenic, neurological effects associated with aluminum, lead, and manganese, kidney effects from barium and mercury, effects on the gastrointestinal system related to beryllium and copper. It is important to note that multiple coal combustion waste constituents contribute to certain health effects. Exposure to combinations or mixtures of these constituents may increase the risk of developing these health problems. As we have seen in some of the pictures this morning from the particular sites, people can come into contact with coal combustion waste through breathing if the dust is in the air, or through drinking water if constituents have leached from a disposal site into groundwater that is tapped by drinking water wells. And as we have heard, not far from here in Gambrills, Maryland, coal combustion waste was used to reclaim a former sand and gravel pit. Constituents of the coal combustion waste reached the drinking water wells of nearby residents, and sampling by the county health department found concentrations of aluminum, arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, lead, manganese, and thallium above drinking water standards in some wells. It is difficult to study and therefore accurately quantify the population-level health impacts of coal combustion waste exposure. 3 of the common coal combustion waste management practices, landfill, surface impoundment, or use in reclamation of mines, result in localized disposal. Communities surrounding such disposal sites are typically small. Proximity to the coal combustion waste disposal site will likely spur interest in evaluating community health. Unfortunately, systematic health effects research in any one small community will have limited statistical power to detect changes in health outcomes. In absence of traditional epidemiological studies, human health risk assessment methods are available to evaluate population exposures to multiple contaminant mixtures. Because coal combustion waste is a complex mixture of constituents, risk assessment methods will be essential to evaluating the health risks of exposure to coal combustion waste. And let me conclude with a few key points. Coal combustion waste is a complex mixture that can be mobilized in the environment depending on the uses and disposal methods. People can be exposed to coal combustion waste through breathing or inhalation, direct contact, and ingestion. Health effects of exposure will be underestimated if we ignore the potential for simultaneous exposure to multiple components of the mixture. And prevention of exposure through better management of the waste is ultimately the most sound public health approach. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Fox, very much. Our next witness is Ken Ludwig. He is Senior Project Manager at the Electric Power Research Institute, responsible for research on the management and use of coal combustion waste. Since joining EPRI in 1999, he has worked on various aspects of coal waste and groundwater research, including the potential for environmental release, disposal site management, and coal waste options. We welcome you, sir. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony to this subcommittee. At EPRI, we've been engaged in coal combustion product research, both disposal and use, for over 30 years. Our goal in meeting with legislative staff recently and attending this hearing is to ensure that all pertinent technical information is available to those that may be involved in this important decision-making process. In my brief time today, I'll focus primarily on coal ash. And I believe it was Congressman Whitfield that said that it's confusing to hear coal ash referred to both as a toxic sludge or something that of high toxicity, and on the other hand, hear it referred to as being the same as soil. I hope to provide some illumination on that topic, and as usual, I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Coal ash is derived from the inorganic minerals in coal, and as such, its elemental composition is similar to the composition of rocks and soils. That's inevitable. Trace metals make up less than 1% of the total composition. However, while the trace elements are qualitatively the same as those in rocks and soil, they are enriched slightly relative to rocks and soil, and therefore the material does need to be managed. The toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, TCLP, is the leaching test that has been used to draw the line between hazardous and non-hazardous wastes under RCRA since 1990. In samples from more than 30 power plants in testing we've done at EPRI, no coal ash samples exceeded any TCLP limits for any trace metals. These data are consistent with data from US EPA. We have also compared leachate from fly ash to leachate from other non-hazardous wastes, such as metal slags, and found them to be similar. There are literally hundreds of other laboratory leaching protocols that have been used by EPRI and other researchers to evaluate coal ash, and there's quite a bit of disagreement among the technical community as to which is the best procedure. We are coordinating with EPA on interpretation and use of a new set of leaching protocols that offer a number of benefits in understanding CCP leaching mechanisms. However, the tests produce a lot of data that requires careful evaluation and application on a site-specific basis. Indiscriminate use of selected results from these complicated tests is both misleading and inaccurate. Power plants have been generating and managing coal ash for more than 60 years. EPA released a report in 2007 describing 67 CCP management sites with either groundwater or surface water impacts characterized as proven or potential damage cases. Most of these damage cases represent older facilities without liners, on-site releases, and low-toxicity constituents. Remediation is actively occurring or has been completed at nearly all of the EPA damage case sites. Conversely, a DOE EPA report recently found that nearly all new CCP disposal cells built between 1994 and 2004 were lined and included groundwater monitoring networks. Several states, such as Wisconsin, have had successful non-hazardous disposal requirements in place for CCPs for many years. The physical and chemical properties of CCPs make them valuable raw materials for many construction and geotechnical applications. And I think from the comments I've heard today, we all agree that using the CCPs in safe applications is the best outcome. In 2007, over 50 million tons of CCPs were used rather than disposed. The primary uses for fly ash are as an ingredient in concrete and cement and use in geotechnical fills. FGD gypsum is largely used as a direct replacement for rock gypsum and panel products, and US EPA, USDA, and Federal Highway Administration are all actively involved in CCP use. We recently worked with the Recycled Materials Resource Center to use life cycle analysis programs to quantify the environmental benefits of using CCPs in sustainable construction. Based on 2007 data, using CCPs in place of mined materials saved over 160 trillion BTUs in energy consumption, which is roughly the equivalent of the amount of energy used in 1.7 million homes, or a decent-sized city. 32 billion gallons in water consumption, and 11 million tons in greenhouse gas emissions. And that equates to about taking 2 million autos off the road in a year. In addition, use rather than disposal saved a land area the size of Central Park in New York in 2007. In conclusion, the Kingston release made coal ash a front-page news item, and we're all a lot more aware of some of the issues surrounding coal ash. What we need to do now is define a clear path forward that ensures safe disposal and allows for continued growth in CCP use. This will require continuing to fix problem sites such as Kingston and the damage cases, and I believe there was a hearing on Kingston yesterday that presented the progress that's been made on that site in just a year. And along with that, we need to identify and implement components of successful disposal site designs and practices. This is not an intractable or difficult task, and I agree with Lisa that there are technologies out there for dealing with the disposal of these materials. There are many examples of successful CCP disposal sites in all parts of the country right now. Finally, we need to continue to grow the use of these materials in applications that are demonstrated to be both safe and of value. Every ton that is used rather than disposed provides savings in energy, water, greenhouse gas emissions, land area, and natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lively, very much. Our final witness, Dr. Donald McGraw, is a practicing physician in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dr. McGraw has 30 years of experience in occupational and environmental medicine and has received a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University. We welcome you, sir. Whenever you're ready, please begin. Can you move that microphone in a little bit closer, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here and join you in this hearing. Thank you. I'd like to first say that I grew up in a small town in southeastern Ohio to a family of farming, coal mining, and steelworking people. When I grew up, we had a coal-fired furnace, which I stoked every morning. I shoveled the coal in as a lad through a window into the basement, and I helped my grandfather dump the coal ash in our garden, which grew wonderfully, as the congressman from Florida mentioned earlier. When I left the area to attend school, I ended up back in Pittsburgh. I've been there for some 30 years now. I serve on the faculties of the University of Pittsburgh Schools of Medicine and Public Health, and have taught medical students and residents for several decades. I previously was, at least briefly, on the faculty at Johns Hopkins prior to coming home. I'm on the attending medical staff at a number of prominent area hospitals. I see patients in those hospitals, in clinics, in their work sites, and in their homes. I have been in coal mines, steel mills, coal tar plants. I've been on coke ovens. I've been just about everywhere that coal has been used. Only hearts of stone could fail to be moved to compassion by the stories and personal plight of the three families who spoke before. But tragedies occur all too frequently in the form of tsunamis or typhoons in Thailand, the Philippines, and mainland China, hurricanes like Katrina in New Orleans and Biloxi, where I have participated in the aftermath and helped in at least a small way with my church in the cleanup. Hurricane Ike in Galveston, earthquakes in Peru and Russia and elsewhere around the world have brought death and devastation. Volcanic eruptions in Mexico, elsewhere, leave in their wakes tragedy that's all too real. But in my experience, the main tragedy in coal combustion is the devastating job loss and economic devastation in the wake of steel mill shutterings and coal mine closures in southwestern Pennsylvania, southeastern Ohio, the mountains of West Virginia, Kentucky, Illinois, and elsewhere. It would be truly a misadventure, tragic misadventure, to plunge these people even deeper into economic darkness. In the course of my work in 2005, I was asked to see a number of individuals, including adults and children, a half dozen, maybe even more than that, when an accidental spill of fly ash occurred in the Forward Township not far from Pittsburgh. This was a large pile of ash that had been there for probably 50 years and slid down the hill into this tiny community and coated the ground where these people lived a foot or two in depth. And this was a soft, flaky ash, much like you would see coming out of any coal-powered facility. These people, unfortunately, waded around in it for days, cleaned it, shoveled it, swept it, breathed it in their own personal cleanups before some attention was paid. The DEP in Pennsylvania is very good, and they came to the rescue, and ultimately that cleanup has been underway. I saw those individuals as individual patients. I listened to their stories. I evaluated them physically, and I could find no objective abnormalities in any of those people. Simultaneously or concomitantly, the Allegheny County Health Department, part of Dr. Bruce Dixon, who's just a marvelous physician, examined these people, tested their urine, their blood, their hair, their nails, and could find no evidence of any increased exposure to any heavy metals or any medical problems. Subsequently, these people were re-examined by the county health department in 2009, last spring, and once again were given a clean bill of health after extensive evaluation. Last year, I had the opportunity to go to Tennessee And I'm not sure why I was asked, other than the fact that I had been involved with individuals from Pittsburgh and vicinity. I went down to Kingston and saw the massive upheaval down there that was caused by the release of a large stock of coal fly ash in a retention pond, which gave way after a very long period of heavy rain, much like the weather caused the problems in Forward Township. This ash slid largely into the waterways nearby, but it did slide into the yards and homes of, I think, probably about 5 or 6 families whose houses were certainly adversely affected. I also had the opportunity, aside from touring the area, not to examine any of these individuals, but to participate in an open meeting in a local school in which any community residents or interested parties could attend, and probably some 150 people or so came, some of whom were residents, and some others were just interested, and asked questions about the potential adverse health effects of their exposure in this setting. And I tried to reassure them that their exposure now and in the future was extremely unlikely to be detrimental to their personal health, the health of their children, their animals, etc. In the course of my practice, I've had the opportunity to address the potential toxicity of heavy metals such as arsenic in a wide variety of settings. I've examined hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals whose work has required that they be in the presence of compounds like arsenic and coal tar and coke oven emissions and other potentially toxic materials. And as it was pointed out earlier, all of these are natural occurring minerals. They occur in the substrata of the earth. They're released by volcanic eruptions, by forest fires, in far greater amounts than are released as a result of industrial production. Arsenic.
If you could summarize, please, Dr. McGraw.
Yes, I'm sorry. Arsenic is present in water in high concentrations in mineral springs all over North America, and we eat it every day in our foodstuffs, and we drink it in our water. That's not to say that it's not potentially toxic, but so are a wide variety of other materials. Cars are dangerous too, but if we ban them or extremely limit their use, it would be devastating to the economy of this country.
Thank you, Dr. McGraw, very much. Now we'll turn to questions from the subcommittee. Let me ask you, Dr. Fox, I just heard Dr. McGraw talking about arsenic, as not a particularly dangerous a substance to be ingested by human beings. Could you talk a little bit about the ingestion of arsenic or other heavy metals over a period of many years in terms of what that risk might be to human beings?
Yes, thanks. That is a distinction that...
Can you move in that microphone a little bit closer, please?
Okay. That is a distinction that it's useful to make in several of the examples I think that Dr. McGraw discussed. In Forward Township, for example, and in Kingston, Tennessee, those were situations where the exposures were relatively short-term, and sort of the immediate nature of the spill prompted a quite rigorous cleanup. In situations as in Gambles, Maryland, that we heard about earlier, the waste has been disposed in this former sand and gravel pit since the mid-90s, approximately. And the contamination of the groundwater there may have been going on for years and may continue for some time. So chronic exposure to arsenic and some of the other constituents is associated with a number of health problems that I already discussed.
Do you agree with that, Dr. McGraw?
Which part?
The part where she's saying is the continuous exposure to these constituent elements over a period of time are related to serious medical consequences.
That all depends on the concentration, the dose, the area of exposure, how it's taken in. Our body has numerous capabilities for eliminating potential toxins from it. We're very well constructed to manage our health despite exposure to many natural elements. And while there are huge concentrations of materials like arsenic, sadly, in the well water in places like Taiwan and Bangladesh, they are many degrees of magnitude higher than any that might ever be potentially even occurring in the United States in any conceivable way.
So you're saying that the hundreds of thousands of people who died in Bangladesh related to ingestion of arsenic is something that we shouldn't be concerned about here as a warning to us?
I'm not sure of those numbers, Mr. Markey.
Well, you just cited Bangladesh, so hundreds of
right,
thousands of people
but
have
perhaps
died there.
I'd have to check and see what those numbers were. But the
World Health Organization says that hundreds of thousands of people have died in Bangladesh. You cited Bangladesh.
Good.
I'm assuming you're relating it to your World Health Organization analysis.
Correct.
Do you dispute the World Health Organization?
No, I don't.
So then take the arsenic findings there and extrapolate them for the purposes of what lesson you want us to draw from Bangladesh in terms of exposure to arsenic, please.
Those levels in those countries are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of micrograms per liter relative to our required water levels of 1/100th of a microgram per liter.
Okay, but the
if
EPA
I can,
and the World Health Organization have identified arsenic as a carcinogen. Do you disagree with that finding?
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman. Let me give you, if I may provide you with an analogy. Thousands of women and possibly men are injected on a daily basis with botulinum toxin, the deadliest material known to humankind. They are injected in their faces for cosmetic purposes. 1/18th of a millionth of an ounce is a lethal dose for a human being, and yet it goes into syringes and into people's bodies on a daily basis. There are many, many toxins that we either voluntarily or involuntarily expose ourselves to on a daily basis. Once again, it depends on the dose, the level, and in this country, those levels will never be replicated ever.
Well, no, I don't think that's so. I think that what we're learning here, and we're seeing this in the testimony of the witnesses beforehand, that if enough of it is placed in areas that are adjacent to populated areas, that it can leach into the water system, and over a sustained period of time, there could be a dramatic impact on human beings as they ingest this material. So we're not talking about what you were referring to earlier about a one-time or two-time exposure. Here we're talking about something that is a continuous
With all due respect,
exposure.
Mr. Chairman, 3 cases, as tragic as they might be, do not represent epidemiology. I have looked at countless workers who have been working for decades with exposure to these and other materials and seen no evidence of any harm. And they certainly were exposed at far higher levels than the general public would ever be.
3,000 young people are going to begin smoking today in America. 1,000 of them will die from smoking-related illnesses, and 2 will not. Okay?
I'm not sure I see the
is
point.
Really our concern. So you may, and again, you're not an epidemiologist, I don't think.
I have studied it extensively, and I do appreciate it. I read the literature regularly.
I appreciate that. But you're taking your personal examples and extrapolating, which is different from actually presenting an epidemiological study.
I have read the epidemiologic literature.
Okay, Ms. Evans, could you tell us if there's just a small number of examples here, or are there more people like the witnesses that we saw on the first panel that represent the population that we are concerned with?
Absolutely, thank you. I would say we have a country full of examples similar to the people who spoke today. There are so many unlined dump sites, whether they be unlined ponds or unlined landfills or simply holes in the ground like gravel pits and mines where we've placed this waste. For 30 years having unregulated disposal, it's resulted in a lot of waste sites that present dangers to the general public. The EPA has identified 71 sites so far, as Ken referenced, where there's been contamination of ground and surface water in 23 states. That's a drop in the bucket, and EPA does admit that. And one reason that we can say with some certainty that it's a drop in the bucket is that so many of these dump sites are not monitored. And if you don't monitor the dump sites, you don't know exactly what is leaving them. So I would say that in my experience in numerous communities over the last 10 years working with this waste, there are certainly many, many communities that are.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Evans, very much.
If I could respond, Mr. Chairman, just briefly to Ms. Evans' comment. She identified sites, but I challenge her to identify numbers of individuals or communities where it has been demonstrated objectively, medically, that they have developed either life-threatening illnesses or have died as a result of exposure to coal tar ash. I challenge her because it doesn't exist. I've seen people die 1,000 different ways, Mr. Chairman, but I've never seen one either die or become ill from exposure to coal ash.
And I'd be happy to provide the committee with, the subcommittee, with medical reports from people who, and this mostly occurs in litigation, where they have to draw the connection between the coal ash and the disease. But we do have reports to that effect and can submit those to the committee.
Anecdotal legal cases do not represent epidemiology. That's not science. That's law.
Well, I appreciate that, but we also have certain other kind of, we call them the law res ipsa loquitur, which is the thing speaks for itself. I think that's what we heard from Robin Whitaker Pierce earlier. Okay, the property cannot be sold. Okay, the entire community is frozen. We have widespread health impacts, and to a certain extent, there's been a see no evil, hear no evil aspect to this issue over the years. So we're just kind of catching up with this issue in the same way that we just, that we caught up with the tobacco issue as well. And I think that the witnesses here today provide very compelling evidence that there is a problem here, that long-term exposure to these elements is dangerous. And again, the EPA is in the process of completing their recommendations. And when they do, we'll have them here for the hearing, and we'll be able to ask them those questions. Let me turn now and recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Evans, Mr. Ladwick, we've checked with my Michigan utilities as they dispose of this ash. I'm told that they use landfills that are clay lined, unlike, I guess, what now Maryland is now pursued in terms of my question from Ms. Queen on the last panel. They have monitoring. It requires a monitoring of any leakage as well. It's regulated as an industrial waste in the state of Michigan. And my question is, how many states have a similar type procedure for the disposal of waste? Do you know? I mean, Ms. Evans, you
yes.
know the answer?
The majority of states do not require what you
so
just
Michigan
described.
Michigan is more advanced than most states? Is that what you're saying?
I would say if you're talking about clay, states that require clay liners for all waste disposal units would be in the minority. But I would also say that
And monitoring as well.
And monitoring.
What you? Yeah, I want to make sure I don't run out of time in my 5 minutes. Mr. Ladwick, would you concur with that?
Not exactly. I don't know the number of states that currently have liner requirements. I do know that, as I said in my testimony, essentially all new facilities built between 94 and 2004, when the DOE and the EPA did their study, all employed liners. So either their states are requiring them or they're voluntarily installing liners. With respect to groundwater monitoring, almost all landfills have groundwater monitoring. They have as far back as the 90s. Ponds have had a little bit more checkered history with respect to monitoring, and it was more like half at that time had monitoring in the 90s when we did a study on this. I'm not sure what the number is now.
Now, in Michigan, a good share of the waste is actually used for highway, cement, particle board, that type of thing. In fact, I'm aware of a letter that the Michigan Department of Transportation sent to the Federal Highway Administration saying that this is a good use of the substance. Actually, it performs better with that. Question, I think in a lot of people's view, if we can recycle this somehow in terms of a meaningful way, and I'm told that, again, in Europe, perhaps as much as 80 to 90% of the ash is used for this type of purpose. In the United States, we're closer to about 40% or about half. The question is, if we classify it as a hazardous waste, as some perhaps have suggested, what would that do to the efforts to then recycle this versus putting it all into a landfill or that type of thing?
Let me, before I respond to the recycling question, let me just quickly go back to Michigan's landfill regulations, because I think it's in also Ken's statement regarding the 56 facilities that were built between 1994 and 2004, because the important point has to be made that all liners are not equal, and the requirement that landfills and surface impoundments have clay liners was shown by EPA to be insufficient. So the standard that landfills and surface impoundments need to have composite liners is something that EPA stated in its risk assessment, and that landfills and surface impoundments that are not so lined present an unacceptable risk of migration. So
you're saying they need to have a composite
liner, and
how many states have that today?
Oh, the requirement for very few have a requirement that all landfills and all surface
almost
impoundments.
None.
I mean, 50% of the states in the United States don't require ponds to have any liners. So we can go from there, or financial assurance.
Well, moving to my next question, if it was classified as a hazardous waste, would in fact we be able to recycle much of the material there like we do today? Yes or no?
Yes. EPA has the flexibility to deal with recycled waste as solid waste. It can parse out, and under the statute, it can regulate waste that's disposed as hazardous, perhaps put truly beneficially reused
Would that
waste.
not add tremendously to the cost and therefore diminish the amount that's recycled today?
It shouldn't. If it's going to cost more to recycle the waste,
yeah,
I mean, if it's going to cost more to dispose of the waste, there's going to be an incentive to recycle.
Mr. Ladder, do you have a guess as to what the cost would be to the industry as well? Not only to go to a composite type liner versus the clay liners that are used today with the monitoring that they have, which I think might have resolved Ms. Queen's problem, because it was in her testimony she indicated that went to an unlined site. But how would that impact recycling as well?
Well, I think you have a couple questions embedded there. The costs of moving to, say, a hazardous waste requirements at these facilities would increase the cost of disposal by a factor of 10. We'd be up into the billions of dollars for for the utility industry. $13 billion, I think, was one estimate that was provided. That's a significant cost, and we have done an analysis that the impact of that cost, as well as the cost of phasing out wet management, what those costs would actually do to utilities, how many units it would cause.
It would cost billions of dollars more. That would have to be passed along to the ratepayers, right?
I would assume so. I'm not familiar with utility financing.
My time has expired, so just tell me how it would impact recycling.
From everything we've heard, and I believe USWAG, the Utility Solid Waste Activities Group, has collected a number of letters. There are somewhere on the order of 150 to 200 letters from utilities, marketing companies, end users, all stating very clearly that a hazardous waste designation would have a chilling effect on any use, just simply because using a material when it's deemed hazardous if it goes in one direction and usable when it goes in another direction is not a workable situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will recognize himself. Dr. McGraw, my grandfather got off the boat from Ireland in 1900 and landed in Pittsburgh. He worked 41 years at Kerry Furnace in Rankin. My father followed him in the steel industry and worked 31 years at Edgar Thompson in Braddock. I worked there 2 summers and realized that I don't want to be a steel worker. I appreciate steel industry and coal. All my constituents get their electricity from coal in Pittsburgh, and I've lived my entire 56 years there. We Pittsburghers didn't much appreciate Mr. Carnegie dumping all his waste in the Monongahela rivers and the Allegheny rivers, and at one point those rivers got very dark and nobody fished in those rivers, and regulation finally were put in place that made sure that people just didn't indiscriminately dump things into the rivers or up into the air. John Surma is a dear friend of mine, the current CEO of U.S. Steel, and he'll tell you that he thinks that a clean environment and a steel industry can coexist. This committee is not talking about putting the coal industry or the steel industry out of business, but what we are saying that in this country there are many states that have no regulations on this or very lax regulations. Pennsylvania has been overseeing beneficial reuse of coal ash since 1985. We have standards in place since 1992. States like Wisconsin have good standards. We believe that these industries can coexist with good regulation and partnership. So when you said to your testimony that you were much more concerned about the job loss in the coal industry than you were about the potential health hazards, I would tell you that we need to do both. We can protect jobs and protect people's lives. That's what we're trying to research here on the committee. I'm familiar with Forward Township. I used to represent it for 8 years before redistricting. I'm curious, how did you come to get involved in the Forward Township case? You mentioned you were involved in examining people there.
I believe that they were referred to me through the Graduate School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh, where I've been a faculty member for a long time, because they knew me as someone who would see anyone for virtually any kind of problem. And I believe the chairman of the department referred them all to me when they called into his office. You know, I don't disagree with anything you just said, Mr. Doyle. I respect the need to have a clean environment, and certainly want nothing less myself. And I think the Commonwealth should be particularly proud in having already done a good job in that. But to classify a relatively benign material as a hazardous waste would, I think, lead to a cascade of events that would cost jobs and enormous resources to the power industry, the coal industry, the steel industry, and all the way down the line.
So it's your testimony, then, that you believe coal ash to be completely benign and not a health risk to anyone.
That's correct. We
could just eat this stuff. And
well,
you apparently did, right? You
know,
put it on your garden and ate it.
If you put some on my cereal, it might not be very tasty, but you'd have to put it on a long, long time before we would get to the point where those poor people in other countries are consuming it and would be at risk. So in this country, the likelihood of that happening
I want to be certain
is
one
like
thing.
being
Your
struck by
testimony
lightning.
said that, you know, you talked about the arsenic levels in Bangladesh. You're certainly not subscribing to the fact that we should adopt Bangladesh water standards here in the United States. I mean, you're saying it's okay to drink that much?
No.
Of course, U.S. water, that wouldn't concern you?
Of course not. No. All I'm doing is contrasting and trying to show that with any material, however apparently benign, whether it's salt, sugar, arsenic, mercury, or anything else, there is a dose and there is a length of time of exposure that's required to cause a potential problem.
Right.
Presumably in these hallowed halls, we've probably already met government requirements of introducing the appropriate kind of new green fluorescent bulbs, all of which contain a particularly lethal form of metallic mercury, and for which there is no hazardous waste reclamation plan in place, to my knowledge.
My time is starting to run out, and I have a couple more. Dr. Fox, you just heard what Dr. McGraw said. He basically says we could eat this stuff, and it might not taste so good, but it's not going to hurt us. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'd like to bring the subcommittee's attention to some recent findings from some of my colleagues at Hopkins and others that address the issue of sort of typical U.S. exposures. There have been research findings in the last 2 or 3 years of relating arsenic exposure to cancer and also diabetes. So there is a growing body of literature that reflects the exposure conditions in the U.S. and associates arsenic exposure with some health effects of concern.
Thank you. I see my time's expired, and who's next up on the list here? Ed? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being with us this morning. Mr. Ladwood, you state that since 1990 that ERPI has used the Toxicity Characteristic Leaching Procedure Protocol, which is used by EPA, to test for the hazardous characteristics of 8 trace metals that EPA would consider critical to a hazardous waste designation: arsenic, selenium, barium, cadmium, silver, chromium, lead, and mercury. And that EPRI data from all the analysis and tests that they have conducted shows no coal ash samples exceeded any of the TCLP limits. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And we know that EPA has looked at this issue repeatedly from 3 or 4 times. I don't have the dates with me right now, but the most recent one was 2000, and even they decided not to classify this as a hazardous material. In your test, were there any types of coal or coal mined from certain regions of the country or world that is burned here in the United States that you did not test?
Oh, I couldn't vouch that we've tested every type of ash from every coal that's burned, from anywhere in the world. But we've tested a broad range. We have a very representative database.
Well, I think the key here today is that our chairman stated that we need a balanced approach here, because we have to use coal to meet our electrical demands and remain competitive in the world and to continue to create jobs and not lose jobs. And the thing that bothers me about Ms. Evans and the group that she represents, in her testimony, she says we need a federal standard to police this disposal of ash, which I agree with. We do need a federal standard. And then she goes on and says even if we get one, it's not enough. So we need a federal standard, but even if we get one, that's not enough. So I think that's the problem that we have, and I know we're getting ready to vote, Mr. Chairman, so I'll yield back the balance of my time.
May I just take a moment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitfield. We have votes coming up, and we're going to try to get these witnesses in, so hopefully you'll get a chance to elaborate. But and when we come back, we'll try to give you some more time. Mr. Mathis.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Ms. Evans. In your testimony, you highlight that more stringent regulation of coal ash has raised state recycling rates significantly. I think you're referring probably to Wisconsin.
Yes, I am.
Does more stringent regulation include a hazardous waste subtitle C designation?
Well, there is no subtitle C designation currently. No, it means more stringent. Wisconsin has more stringent regulations than its neighbors, and its recycling rate is about double what the neighboring states have.
In your testimony, you recommend that EPA must designate coal combustion waste as hazardous waste under subtitle C of RCRA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What would be the impact of the recycling and reuse efforts in Wisconsin if there was federal action to regulate coal ash as hazardous waste under subtitle C of RCRA?
I don't think it would change. I think that there might even be tightening that would have to be done on the Wisconsin regulations, so there might even be more incentive if costs go up to dispose of waste in line landfills. There'd be more incentive to find safe reuse.
We have the state of Wisconsin actually has a different opinion. they have sent a letter from the Department of Natural Resources that says, and I'll quote, if coal ash were to be regulated under RCRA Subtitle C, the options for beneficially using or reusing the ash would be significantly impacted and severely limited. So we got to keep looking at this in the balanced type option I think that Mr. Whitfield was talking about before about what we're trying to do. People like the recycling idea, but if you go to hazardous waste designation, you know, there are other consequences to this, and I just want to make sure that was on the record.
But I think you're looking at this very black and white. There are a lot of hazardous wastes that are successfully recycled into products.
I'm looking at it for coal ash waste, not for all products that are.
Right, but you have to realize that EPA has flexibility going into this regulatory process and really does want to.
I just want to get on the record that there's a potential conflict there, and you suggested that we ought to, you know, you laud Wisconsin, and they're saying don't do what you're suggesting we do. I just want that on the record. Mr. Ladwood, have you analyzed coal ash in relation to EPA's test to determine if a waste is hazardous under RCRA?
Yeah, well, we've done the TCLP test. Yeah. We just talked about that, yes.
And what did you find?
We find it always passes the TCLP test. EPA finds that it almost always passes.
How does coal ash compare to another large volume solid waste stream like municipal solid waste?
It's roughly on par with that. The risks posed by any of these materials that are non-hazardous are roughly in the same ballpark.
Okay.
Are there a minute on the TCLP question?
No, because I am very limited on time, and I got a bunch of questions I want to ask. Mr. Ladwood, can you describe just quickly benefits to the environment from recycling the coal ash?
Yes, I listed some of those in my presentation, but there's benefits in energy savings, water savings, greenhouse gas emissions, and land use. Those are probably what I would call the 4 primary benefits from an environmental perspective, and there's obviously cost benefits.
Okay. Dr. McGraw, in your testimony, you highlight the need to properly and safely contain fly ash wherever it is stored or used in some practical application. Do you believe that a hazardous waste designation is necessary to properly and safely contain coal ash?
I do not.
I know that my colleague from Illinois is anxious to ask, so, you know, I can do one more and then I'm going to get it to you. Sorry, I just want to make sure. I think that this question about classifying coal ash as hazardous waste and the potential for it to eliminate or at least greatly reduce reuse opportunities is an issue that this panel that we need to talk about as a committee. I think that conflict, or at least that potential conflict, is something that we need to flush out more. And I think that's why it's important we're having this hearing. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I have a unanimous consent for opening statements that all members may be included into the record.
Without objections.
And also, these are pre-cleared. Unanimous consent for letters have been pre-cleared with your staff from the East Coast Resolution on Hazardous Waste, the April 1st, 2009 letter to the EPA from Otsuamo, September 19, 2009 letter to the EPA from the Unions for Jobs and the Environment, and November 17, 2009 letter to EPA from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For a panel, do you reject the assertion that the Illinois EPA is the closest to the citizens of Illinois and has a vested interest in protecting the health of the citizens of Illinois? Dr. McGraw, yes or no?
The state
EPA.
The state EPA, I think, would have the most direct relationship.
Yeah,
familiarity with the issues.
Dr. Fox, do you reject the fact that the Illinois EPA's mission is to protect the health and safety of the citizens of the state of Illinois?
No.
No. Ms. Evans? State of Illinois EPA. I'm just talking about the state of Illinois.
Yes, and as a former federal EPA employee, I would say that there's often a conflict between the state EPAs and...
My question is, do you reject the premise that the state of Illinois EPA does not have the interest of the citizens of the state in health and safety issues?
They might have the interest, but not always the political power to regulate the community.
So you're saying that they don't have the interest of the citizens of the state of Illinois?
They have the interest. They might not have the political will to properly regulate.
So you reject this letter from the Illinois EPA that says that they can best regulate this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ladwood? No, I don't reject that. Thank you very much. Dr. McGraw, part of our job is to make the complex as simple as possible so that we can help educate our constituents and educate ourselves. Epidemiologic. Define.
That's the study of populations and in contrasting groups of individuals within a population, a designated population, who have a specific injury or illness, and comparing them with those individuals who don't, and trying to determine as a result what might have led to that specific problem, whether there was a common
So you're
point.
familiar with the scientific method, in essence?
Yes, I studied epidemiology as part of my training.
And the scientific method creates, and we're dealing this with the whole climate debate, is that there are facts. There's basic facts that can be gathered and reviewed to make an analysis on what is going on. And that's what you are testifying to, and that's what your testimony says.
Facts versus presumption, which is what I'm saying, yes.
And that's why I'm trying to make the complex simple, because we always talk about arsenic. We've talked about arsenic in this committee since I've been a member. A Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with arsenic would be hazardous to human health. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. McGraw?
Filled, yes, it would
Filled
sink to the
completely.
bottom, and you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't get much if you were swimming in it because
Now let me ask this
it's
question.
not soluble in water.
Let me ask. A Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with water with one eye drop of arsenic, would that be hazardous to human health?
Of course not.
So this whole debate is this, using real science to determine the health effects, and at what cost. It would probably be cheaper to drain an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with arsenic than it would be to take out the one eyedropper of arsenic. And the issue is at what cost based upon what science. We're having the same debate on the ClimateGate issue. When the scientists can't give us the facts, then you go on emotion. And when emotions run rampant, it costs the jobs that you're referring to, that I refer to in this whole issue. So I applaud my colleague, Mr. Matheson, for trying to get to the point of we better be careful not solely to run on emotions, because there is a cost-benefit analysis of all this stuff, and we all understand that. So let's get to the facts. And I think why your testimony is so compelling is because you're doing it based on your great credentials, epidemiological background, and on the facts of study of the health of individuals. And I want to thank you for your time, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, gentleman's time has expired. We apologize to you for the floor schedule. We have 45 minutes of roll calls that are about to begin out on the House floor, and that's unfortunate, but the fact. So this is a very important hearing. It's in anticipation of the Environmental Protection Agency promulgating new rules that will deal with the public health related issues here. But of course, the question of jobs is also part of this discussion. We have heard here today that there are materials that are hazardous. They have poisoned people. They have destroyed homes and have contaminated the environment. No one, as Mr. Doyle said, is talking about shutting down the coal industry. What we are talking about is prohibiting unsafe disposal practices from being allowed to continue, so that we can ensure that there continues to be safe commercial use of all of the materials that are in question. The EPA can use its statutory authority to craft a rule that both protects public health and allows for safe practices to continue without causing jobs to be lost. We can do both. Mr. Doyle has made that point. We did both when we decided that we were going to regulate clean water, safe food. We don't want to prohibit, but at the same time, we want to ensure we put in those protections for public health. So we thank each of the witnesses. We want to continue to work with you. We apologize to you, Ms. Evans, and to others. I know you have other points which we would like to include in the record in its written form if you would like to provide it to the committee. This hearing is adjourned.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.